Millionaire CEO married a divorced maid for fun and joke. What she did next destroyed his plans. 34. He'd built Grayson Industries from nothing into a tech empire worth $3 billion. Every person in that room owed their fortune to his ruthless vision. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. He made $1 billion empire by treating people like chess pieces, until the day he picked the wrong pawn to sacrifice. The glass conference room on the 40th floor gleamed like a crystal cage, Atlanta's skyline stretching beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, men in $1,000 suits laughed at their own cruelty while the city's working class moved like ants below. Wyatt Grayson sat at the head of the mahogany table, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. At 34, he'd built Grayson Industries from nothing into a tech empire worth $3 billion. Every person in that room owed their fortune to his ruthless vision. Quarterly profits are up 18%, announced his CFO, sliding documents across polished wood. The new algorithm is performing beyond projections. Wyatt barely glanced at the numbers. Money bored him now. What he craved was the game, the thrill of controlling people who thought they had choices. Speaking of performance, laughed board member James Mitchell, loosening his silk tie. Did you see the maid who cleaned my penthouse yesterday? Acted like she owned the place. These people really think they matter. The room erupted in knowing chuckles. These men lived in a world where domestic staff were invisible furniture, existing only to serve their comfort. They're all the same, added another executive. Desperate, replaceable, grateful for scraps. Wyatt's fingers drummed against the table. An idea began forming. Cruel, calculated, perfect. You think they're all identical? He asked, voice carrying that dangerous quiet that made his employees sweat. Absolutely, Mitchell replied. Interchangeable parts in the machine. A smile spread across Wyatt's face, the kind that made stock prices fluctuate. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through employee files. Faces of women who cleaned his buildings, served his meals, maintained his empire while remaining utterly invisible. Then I'll prove your point, he said, finger hovering over one profile. I'll marry one of them just to show how replaceable they are. The room fell silent. These men had witnessed Wyatt's games before, but this felt different. Bigger. More dangerous. You're serious? Mitchell whispered. Dead serious. A simple experiment. Take one of the help, put a ring on her finger, watch her crumble under pressure she was never meant to handle. When it falls apart, we'll have proven once and for all that people know their place. Have you ever watched someone joke about people they think are beneath them? Have you seen wealth used as a weapon? Tell me in the comments, what's the cruelest thing you've witnessed from someone in power? His thumb stopped on a photograph. Dark skin, intelligent eyes, something in her expression that seemed almost challenging. Kenya Morrison, age 29, recently divorced. Professional house cleaning services. Perfect. As laughter died down, Wyatt pulled out his phone and scrolled through employee files. I'll prove my point, he said, finger hovering over one profile. Her. She'll do perfectly. The photo that would change everything showed a woman with knowing eyes. Kenya Morrison, age 29, recently divorced. What he couldn't see in that picture was the storm he was about to unleash. She cleaned his penthouse every Tuesday at 3 p.m., invisible as furniture, until the day he really looked and saw something that made his blood run cold with curiosity. Afternoon sun streamed through the penthouse's massive windows, casting geometric shadows across marble floors so polished they reflected like dark water. She moved through the space like she belonged there, every gesture deliberate, every glance calculated. Kenya Morrison had been cleaning this penthouse for 6 months. Twice a week, she arrived with her supplies and transformed chaos into order. The owner was never home during her shifts until today. She heard the elevator before she saw him. Wyatt Grayson stepped into his domain wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. His presence filled the space instantly, commanding attention without demanding it. Kenya didn't stop working. She'd learned long ago that wealthy men preferred their help to be invisible. She continued dusting the entertainment center, her movements smooth and practiced. "You're here late," she said without turning around. Most domestic workers would have apologized, explained, cowered. Her simple observation caught him off guard. "It's my home," he replied, studying her with new interest. "Of course." She moved to the next section, neither rushing nor slowing her pace. "Your accountant called about the quarterly reports. Something about offshore discrepancies. Why, it's blood-chilled. Those calls were private, confidential. How did she—" "I don't answer your phone," she continued, finally turning to face him. But the machine picked up. Loud voice. Her eyes met his directly. No submission, no apology. Just fact delivered with unsettling calm. She was beautiful, he realized. Not the desperate beauty of women who threw themselves at his money, but the quiet confidence of someone who knew her own worth. Her skin was rich brown, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that revealed the elegant line of her neck. "Kenya," he said, reading her name from the service paperwork. "Mr. Grayson." She gathered her cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency. "Same time Thursday? Actually, I'd like to discuss something with you." For the first time, she paused. Her head tilted slightly, curious but not concerned. "I have a business proposition. Already have a job. This will be different. Better compensation, better circumstances." Kenya set down her supplies and gave him her full attention. The afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "What kind of proposition? Have you ever underestimated someone based on their job? Ever realized too late that the quiet person in the room was actually the smartest? Drop your stories below." The conversation should have been simple. Rich man offers poor woman a deal. She accepts gratefully. Game over. Instead, Kenya Morrison looked at him like she was solving a puzzle, like she could see through his expensive suit to the man underneath. The feeling made him strangely uncomfortable. When she turned to leave, she paused at the door without looking back. "Mr. Grayson," she said, voice steady as stone, "your accountant called about the quarterly reports. Something about offshore discrepancies." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving him staring at empty space, wondering how a maid knew about his private financial calls. He offered her marriage like a business transaction, expecting shock and gratitude. Instead, she asked to see the contract. The restaurant's private dining room glittered with crystal and gold, designed to intimidate and impress. But across the table, she sat with the stillness of deep water, untouched by the luxury meant to dazzle her into submission. Wyatt had chosen Loup Bernardine carefully. The most expensive restaurant in Atlanta, where reservations required weeks of waiting and connections money couldn't buy. He wanted her overwhelmed, grateful, malleable. Kenya wore a simple black dress that looked elegant despite its obvious discount store origins. She'd arrived exactly on time, neither early from eagerness nor late from nervousness. Just punctual, professional, prepared. "This is beautiful," she said, glancing around the dining room. "I cleaned a place like this once." The owner lost it in a divorce. Not the reaction he'd expected. Most women would have been gushing about the ambience, the honor of being invited. Instead, she'd immediately connected luxury to loss. "Kenya, I'll be direct. I need a wife." She took a sip of water, watching him over the crystal rim. "For how long?" The question threw him. He'd expected shock, questions about love and romance. Instead, she'd cut straight to the practical heart of the matter. A year, maybe two, long enough to fulfill certain requirements. Business requirements? "You could say that." She nodded, processing. "And you chose me because you seem sensible, practical, not prone to complications." Her mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "I see." "And the compensation?" Wyatt slid an envelope across the table. "More money than you'll see in a lifetime of cleaning houses." Kenya opened the envelope without breaking eye contact. Inside was a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen, and a prenuptial agreement thicker than a phone book. Most people would have gasped at the amount. Kenya folded the check in half and set it aside. "I'll need to review my current commitments," she said, flipping through the prenup without reading it. And Mr. Grayson? I have some terms of my own. She slid a folded paper across the table. As he opened it, his confident smile faltered. The first line read, regarding the Peterson Industries investment and related SEC concerns. His eyes snapped to hers. How do you know about Peterson Industries? About the SEC investigation that could destroy your company if certain financial irregularities came to light? The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too bright. His carefully orchestrated game was crumbling before it had even begun. Who are you? He whispered. Kenya stood gracefully, smoothing her dress. Someone who pays attention, Mr. Grayson. Someone who remembers names, dates, phone conversations. Someone who knows that powerful men always leave evidence of their mistakes. If someone offered you a life-changing opportunity with hidden motives, would you take it? What will make you say yes to something that sounds too good to be true? Share your thoughts. She walked toward the exit, then paused. I'll need 48 hours to consider your proposal. But understand, if we do this, we do it on equal terms. You're not buying a wife, Mr. Grayson. You're entering a partnership. I'll need to review my current commitments, she said, folding the prenup without reading it. And Mr. Grayson? I have some terms of my own. She slid a folded paper across the table. As he opened it, his confident smile faltered. The first line read, regarding the Peterson Industries investment and related SEC concerns. She knew. Somehow, impossibly she knew. Their wedding was supposed to be his victory lap, until she walked down the aisle like she was going to war, not to the altar. The judge's chambers felt more like a boardroom than a place for vows. Sterile, efficient, transactional. But when she spoke her "I do," her voice carried weight that made even the jaded official pause. Kenya had chosen a cream-colored suit instead of a wedding dress. Professional, understated, completely inappropriate for a woman supposedly marrying her dreams. She looked like she was closing a business deal, not pledging her life to a man. Two witnesses pulled from the courthouse hallway watched awkwardly as Wyatt signed documents that would legally bind him to a woman he'd known for exactly 72 hours. By the power vested in me by the state of Georgia, the judge intoned, I now pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no celebration. Just a handshake and signatures on marriage certificates that felt more like contracts. The ride to his mansion passed in silence. Kenya stared out the window at Atlanta's sprawling neighborhoods, taking in details like she was memorizing a map. When they pulled through the gates of his estate, she didn't gasp at the size or luxury. She simply observed. Impressive, she said. How many bedrooms? 12. Good. I'll take the one farthest from yours. Wyatt's confidence cracked. Excuse me. Kenya stepped from the car with the grace of someone accustomed to wealth, not someone seeing it for the first time. She looked up at the mansion's imposing facade without intimidation. This arrangement needs observation before participation, she said, hefting her single suitcase. I assume that's acceptable. It wasn't acceptable. It wasn't part of his plan. His cruel joke was supposed to end with her grateful submission, not strategic negotiation. Most wives would want to share their husband's bed, he said carefully. Most wives marry for love. I'm married for mutual benefit. Those are different contracts with different expectations. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to play a role while planning your real move? When did you realize you were stronger than people thought? Tell me about your moment of quiet power. Inside the mansion, Kenya moved through rooms worth millions with the ease of someone who belonged there. She didn't touch expensive artwork or gawk at crystal chandeliers. Instead, she noted exits, security cameras, the locations of phones and computers. The guest wing should suit my needs, she announced, climbing the marble staircase. Thank you for dinner. I'll see you tomorrow. Wyatt stood in his foyer, surrounded by luxury that had impressed senators and celebrities, feeling completely outmaneuvered by a woman carrying a suitcase from Walmart. Her phone buzzed as she reached the top of the stairs. The message made her smile, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her all day. Good night, Mr. Grayson, she called down. Or should I say, husband? The word sounded like a challenge. I'll take the guest room, she announced, setting her small suitcase on the marble floor. This arrangement needs observation before participation. As she climbed the stairs, her phone buzzed with a text that made her smile. The first genuine emotion he'd seen from her all day. The message read, Phase 1 complete. He has no idea what's coming. For 2 weeks, she lived in his house like a spy in enemy territory, watching, learning, and recording everything that mattered. His home office occupied an entire floor, walls lined with monitors displaying stock prices, cryptocurrency values, and global market fluctuations. She stood in the doorway at 3 a.m., memorizing the layout like a battlefield map. Kenya had been Mrs. Grayson for exactly 14 days, and she'd spent every moment studying her new husband like a scientist examining a dangerous specimen. His routines were clockwork precise. Coffee at 6 a.m., gym at 7, office by 9. He worked late, ate dinner alone, and made phone calls he thought no one could hear. But Kenya heard everything. The Peterson investigation is heating up, he'd whispered into his private line the night before. We need those documents to disappear. She'd been dusting the hallway outside his office, invisible as always. Wealthy men forgot that domestic workers had ears. From her guest room window, she watched him leave for his morning run. Exactly 6:47 a.m., same route through the neighborhood every day. Predictable. Vulnerable. Her phone rang. How's married life? The voice belonged to her friend Tasha, the only person who knew the truth about why she'd accepted Wyatt's proposal. Educational, Kenya replied, photographing financial documents spread across his desk. He's exactly what I expected. Ruthless, arrogant, and careless. And the other thing? Kenya paused. The other thing. The way Wyatt looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The electricity when their hands accidentally touched. The growing tension that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. Irrelevant, she said firmly. Girl, please. I've seen the man. Irrelevant is not a word that applies to Wyatt Grayson. I'm not here for romance, Tasha. I'm here for justice. Justice and attraction aren't mutually exclusive. Just be careful you don't get lost in your own game. That evening, Wyatt hosted his first corporate party since their marriage. Kenya descended the main staircase in a midnight blue dress that cost more than her monthly rent. His suggestion, his credit card, his attempt to mold her into his idea of a proper wife. Instead, she'd researched every guest beforehand. She knew their businesses, their scandals, their weaknesses. Gentlemen, Wyatt announced as she joined him in the living room, my wife Kenya. The men who'd laughed at the help in his boardroom now shook her hand politely, their eyes assessing her like they would any other acquisition. Mrs. Grayson, said James Mitchell, the man who'd started the conversation that led to this moment. What a pleasure. The pleasure is mine, Kenya replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I've heard so much about your work. Have you ever had to study someone to protect yourself? When you're the outsider in someone else's world, how do you learn the rules? Share your survival strategies. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, charming investors and board members with insights that impressed and alarmed them. Her questions were too pointed, her knowledge too specific. At the corporate party, she moved through the crowd like she belonged, charming investors and board members with insights that impressed and alarmed them. But when Wyatt's biggest rival approached her with a knowing smile, whispering, "Hello, Mrs. Morrison. I wondered when you'd surface again." Wyatt's blood turned to ice. Morrison wasn't her maiden name, it was her married name. And if Jacob Henley knew her, that meant the woman he married to humiliate turned out to be the ex-wife of his biggest silent partner. And she'd been planning this reunion for 3 years. Jacob Henley's words echoed in Wyatt's head as he cornered Kenya in the mansion's marble hallway. The party guests had gone home, but the questions remained. She stood there in that black dress, calm as still water, waiting for him to speak first. "Morrison," he said, voice rough with confusion and something else, something that felt dangerously like respect. "Your married name was Morrison." Kenya's lips curved into the first real smile he'd seen from her. Not polite, not calculated, real, and it terrified him. "Marcus Morrison," she confirmed, pulling off her heels and walking barefoot across the cold floor. Peterson Industries' golden boy until your board decided he wasn't profitable anymore. The penthouse balcony overlooked the same Atlanta skyline she'd once viewed as an insider, back when she wore designer gowns instead of cleaning uniforms, back when men like Wyatt would have courted her favor instead of mocking her existence. 3 years ago, she continued, stepping outside into the night air, I live in a house bigger than this one. Had a black card with no limit. Went to charity galas where women like your mother would kiss my cheek and tell me how lucky Marcus was. Wyatt followed her onto the balcony, his mind racing. What happened? Kenya gripped the railing, knuckles showing white against her dark skin. Your company happened. Peterson Industries was developing clean energy patents that would have revolutionized the market. But they competed with your fossil fuel investments. The city lights painted her face in gold and shadow as memories played across her features. Pain, rage, something deeper that made his chest tight. Marcus fought back, she whispered. Try to save the company, save our marriage, save face. But when you have Grayson Industries' money working against you, she shrugged. Everything falls apart. The business, the house, the life you thought was permanent. And your marriage? Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. Marcus blamed me. Said if I'd been a better wife, more connected, more useful, maybe I could have prevented the collapse. She turned to face him fully. He made sure I left with nothing. Not even my maiden name felt safe anymore. Wyatt stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. So you became Kenya Davis. Started over. Became invisible, she corrected. Took the first job that would pay cash, keep me under the radar. Learned that powerful men don't see the help. Don't think we have eyes or ears or brains. The space between them crackled with electricity. Anger, attraction, recognition. But you kept watching, he said, understanding flooding through him. Learning, planning. Kenya's eyes locked onto his. For 3 years, I cleaned offices and penthouses, listened to phone calls, memorized faces, waited for the right moment. And I handed it to you. You gift-wrapped it with a proposal. Before either could think, he kissed her. Hard, desperate. She kissed him back just as fiercely, 3 years of anger and loneliness and careful control exploding between them. When they broke apart, both breathless, she pressed her forehead against his. You want to know why I really said yes? She breathed against his mouth. Both of them pressed against the glass wall, the city lights painting them in gold and shadow. Because 3 years ago, you and your board voted to destroy Peterson Industries. My ex-husband lost everything, and so did I. But I kept one thing, Wyatt. I kept the files. His hands stilled on her waist as the full scope of her game became clear. She had enough evidence to destroy him, his company, and half of Atlanta's tech elite. But what she wanted was something money couldn't buy. Wyatt followed Kenya to her room. Not the master suite he'd expected her to claim, but modest guest bedroom on the second floor. What he found there made his blood run cold. Her modest room contained a hidden arsenal. Encrypted drives, financial documents, recorded conversations. 3 years of careful collection spread across the bed like a war room briefing. Jesus, he breathed, staring at bank statements with his signature, SEC filing drafts, recorded board meetings. How did you? 3 years of being invisible gives you access to everything, Kenya said, sitting cross-legged on the bed among the papers. Boardrooms, private offices, personal calls. Amazing what people say when they think nobody's listening. She picked up a USB drive, turning it over in her fingers. This one contains your private conversation with Senator Williams about the environmental impact reports, the ones you buried. Another drive. This has the real numbers from the Peterson Industries acquisition. How you deliberately lowered their stock value before the buyout. Her voice stayed level, professional, but her eyes burned. And this, she held up a different folder. Marcus's signed confession. How he agreed to help destroy his own company in exchange for keeping his personal assets. Wyatt sank into the room's single chair, the weight of 3 years of evidence crushing down on him. He sold out his own business? He sold out me, Kenya corrected. Told your lawyers about our marriage problems, our private conversations, anything that would help you break him faster. The betrayal in her voice cut deeper than any accusation she could have made. "So what's the plan?" Wyatt asked, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "Release everything? Watch me burn." Kenya set the drive down and looked at him directly. "What do you think I want, Wyatt?" He studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders like armor, the intelligence that had been hiding behind polite silence for months. "Revenge," he said finally. "Wrong." She stood up, moving closer until she was standing between his knees, her hands resting on his shoulders. "You think this is about money?" she whispered, pulling him closer. "This is about power, about being invisible while men like you decide who matters." He kissed her with desperate hunger, finally seeing her not as a pawn, but as the player who'd been moving all the pieces. Their coming together was fierce, competitive, each touch a claim, each kiss a challenge. Where her dress hit the floor, he traced the line of her collarbone with reverence mixed with awe. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was formidable. "I want recognition," she whispered against his neck as he lifted her onto the bed, scattering financial documents that could destroy empires. "I want them to see me, really see me." Their bodies moved together with the rhythm of a war dance. Passion mixed with power, desire tangled with justice. Every kiss tasted like victory and vengeance combined. As they lay tangled in sheets and strategy afterward, his phone exploded with emergency alerts. The morning news was already breaking. Grayson Industries under federal investigation for securities fraud. But Kenya wasn't smiling in victory. She was staring at her own phone in horror. Someone else had released the files. Someone who wanted them both destroyed. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were playing a deeper game than you imagined? Tell me in the comments about a time someone surprised you with their hidden strength. They thought they were playing each other, until they realized they were both pawns in someone else's game. "It wasn't you," Wyatt said, watching Kenya's face go pale as news alerts flooded both their phones. "It wasn't me," she confirmed, scrolling through headlines that painted them both as criminals. "Someone else had access to these files." The FBI agent stood in his mansion's foyer like dark-suited harbingers, their presence transforming his sanctuary into a crime scene with nothing more than badges and briefcases. "Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Grayson," the lead agent said, not caring that their marriage was barely real. "We need to ask you both some questions about corporate espionage, securities fraud, and conspiracy charges." Kenya remained calm, but Wyatt could see her fingers trembling slightly as she buttoned her shirt. "This wasn't part of her plan. We'd like to exercise our right to legal representation," she said smoothly. "That's your choice. But the evidence suggests you've been working together for months to manipulate stock prices and steal proprietary information." "What evidence?" Wyatt demanded. Agent Morrison, the irony of the name wasn't lost on anyone, opened a tablet. Security footage played. Kenya entering Wyatt's office after hours, copying files, making calls. "This footage was anonymously submitted to our office this morning, along with financial records showing suspicious transfers between your accounts." Kenya and Wyatt exchanged glances. Someone had been watching them both, documenting everything, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy them. "We're going to need you both to come with us," the agent continued. "Actually," Kenya said, her voice carrying new authority, "I think we should call my lawyer first. Marcus Morrison. I believe you know him." The agents looked confused, but Wyatt felt ice form in his veins. "Your ex-husband is your lawyer?" "Among other things," Kenya said, already dialing. They were allowed to wait in Wyatt's private safe room while the agents searched the rest of the house. The small, windowless space felt like a bunker, lined with monitors and emergency communication equipment. "This was his plan all along," Kenya said, pacing the small space. "Get us together, let us destroy each other, then swoop in to clean up the pieces." Stress and danger created desperate need for each other. Wyatt pulled her against him, kissing her with the intensity of a man who might lose everything. She responded with equal desperation, both of them needing to feel alive while their world collapsed around them. Against the safe room's steel walls, they found each other again, This time, not as opponents or strangers, but as partners facing a common enemy. Her legs wrapped around his waist, her breath hot against his ear as she whispered, "We're going to beat him." When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the reality of their situation crashed back. "He played us both," Wyatt said. "But he made one mistake," Kenya replied, straightening her clothes. "He forgot that I know all his secrets too." The burner phone in Kenya's hidden safe rang exactly at midnight, a number she'd hoped never to see again. Her ex-husband's voice was smooth as poison honey. "Hello, darling. Enjoying your new marriage? Because tomorrow, the whole world learns what you both did to get those files. Unless, of course, you come home where you belong. When has someone you trusted completely betrayed you? How did you find the strength to fight back when everything seemed hopeless?" Share your comeback story in the comments below. Sometimes the person you're running from is more dangerous than the person you're running to, and sometimes they're working together. Marcus Peterson stepped from the black sedan like a shadow made flesh, his movements carrying the predatory grace of a man accustomed to owning everything he touched, including the woman watching from the penthouse window above. Kenya's entire body went rigid as she watched her ex-husband approach the building. 3 years hadn't changed him. Still perfectly groomed, still radiating the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences. "He's here," she whispered. Wyatt moved beside her at the window. "The FBI? Gone. For now." Kenya's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "Marcus has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians, law enforcement. He probably called them off himself." The penthouse elevator chimed softly. Marcus had a key card. Of course he did. "Kenya, darling." Marcus's voice filled the space like expensive cologne, cloying and overwhelming. He stepped into the living room, wearing a $1,000 suit and a smile that promised pain. "You look domestic." Wyatt stepped forward, but Kenya held up a hand, stopping him. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carefully neutral. 3 years, Marcus continued, settling into Wyatt's favorite chair like he owned it. 3 years you've been planning this little revenge fantasy. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Marrying my business rival, collecting evidence, playing the long game. He laughed. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for." "Smart enough to document everything you did," Kenya replied. "Smart enough to steal files that don't belong to you, you mean?" Marcus's smile turned cruel. "Industrial espionage is a serious crime, darling. 20 years in federal prison, kinda serious." Wyatt couldn't stay quiet anymore. "She was exposing your corruption." Marcus looked at him with amusement. "And what exactly did you think you were doing, Mr. Grayson? Seducing my ex-wife, using her access to damage my investments? You're as guilty as she is." The truth hit Kenya like a physical blow. "You set this up. All of it. The job at Wyatt's penthouse, the timing of his proposal. I made sure you were available when he needed a maid," Marcus confirmed. "And when his little boardroom joke reached my ears, I knew exactly how to use it." Kenya's composure finally cracked. "You used me. Again. I saved you," Marcus corrected. "From poverty, from obscurity, from a life of cleaning up other people's messes. You're my wife, Kenya. You belong with me." "Ex-wife," she said firmly. "Divorced wives don't have the same legal protections as current wives," Marcus said, standing up. "But widows can't testify against their deceased husbands." The threat hung in the air like poison. Wyatt moved protectively in front of Kenya. "Get out. Actually, I have a better idea." Marcus pulled out his phone. "Kenya comes with me now, quietly, and I make both your legal problems disappear. She stays here playing house with you, and tomorrow the world learns about both your crimes in detail." "He doesn't get to have you back," Wyatt growled, pressing her against the bedroom wall after Marcus left. "Not after what he did." Her response was fierce, claiming him as much as he claimed her. Their union now about protection and partnership, not just desire. "Then prove it," she challenged. "Show me I was right to trust you." The text message arrived as they held each other afterward. "Penthouse lobby. Now, come alone or Wyatt's CC problems become criminal charges. You have 10 minutes to decide what matters more, your new life or his freedom." Kenya was already reaching for her clothes when Wyatt grabbed her wrist. "We go together," he said. "Whatever game he's playing it with both of us now." Have you ever had someone from your past try to control your future? What gave you the courage to break free from someone who thought they owned you? Tell me your story in the comments. 3 years of planning came down to one elevator ride, and a decision that would define whether she was victim or victor. The penthouse lobby became a gladiator arena, marble columns and crystal chandeliers, witnessing a battle 3 years in the making, where words cut deeper than blades and silence held more power than screams. Marcus waited by the elevator bank, looking perfectly at ease despite the late hour. He'd changed into casual clothes, jeans and a sweater that made him look approachable, safe. Kenya knew better. "I told you to come alone," he said when he saw Wyatt. "And I told her we're partners now," Wyatt replied, his hand finding Kenya's. Marcus's eyes flicked to their joined hands, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. Pure rage flashed across his features before the pleasant smile returned. "Partners," he repeated. "How romantic. Kenya, do you remember when we were partners? Before you started asking too many questions about my business dealings. Before you started hitting me, you mean?" Kenya's voice carried across the marble space, clear and strong. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I never hit you. Choking doesn't count as hitting, I suppose." Kenya stepped forward, her fear transforming into something more dangerous. "Neither does pushing me downstairs, or locking me in the closet when you brought clients home for private meetings." "You're being dramatic," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. "Am I?" Kenya pulled out her phone, scrolling to a recording app. "Should I play the audio from the night you broke my ribs? Or maybe the voicemail where you threatened to kill me if I ever try to leave?" Wyatt stepped closer to Kenya, electric touches amid the chaos, their connection strengthened by shared peril. She could feel his protective anger radiating like heat. "Those files you're so worried about," Kenya continued, "they're not just about Grayson Industries. They include documentation of your domestic violence, your money laundering, your connections to some very unpleasant people in very unpleasant businesses." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Nobody will believe you. A disgraced ex-wife with a grudge." "Maybe not," Kenya agreed, "but they'll believe hospital records, police reports, witness statements from your own employees who saw the bruises." For the first time since entering the lobby, Marcus looked uncertain. "Here's what's going to happen," Kenya said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You're going to drop all charges against both of us. You're going to disappear from Atlanta and never contact me again. And in return, I won't release the recordings that prove you've been running drugs through Peterson Industries for 5 years. You don't have the Cayman accounts, Marcus, the shell companies, the partnerships with the Morales cartel." Kenya's smile was sharp as a blade. "I know everything." Marcus's pleasant mask finally shattered completely. He lunged forward, hands reaching for her throat with practiced ease. But Wyatt was faster. His fist connected with Marcus's jaw, sending the smaller man stumbling backward into the elevator doors. "Don't," Wyatt said quietly, "ever touch her again." Marcus straightened his sweater, wiping blood from his split lip. "This isn't over." Marcus smiled his cruel, familiar smile as security footage played on his tablet. Kenya entering Wyatt's office after hours, copying files, making calls. "Corporate espionage carries a 20-year sentence, darling. But I'm willing to make a deal." The elevator doors opened behind them, and Kenya realized with crystal clarity that everything, her freedom, Wyatt's empire, their impossible love, hung on what happened next. When you finally faced your biggest fear, what gave you the courage to stand up? Have you ever had someone believe in you when you couldn't believe in yourself? Share your moment of finding your voice in the comments. She bet everything on the one thing Marcus never expected. The truth, spoken loud enough for the whole world to hear. Kenya sat in the green room of Channel 7 News, her hands steady as she applied lipstick in the mirror. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. Outside, Atlanta buzzed with rumors about the mysterious Mrs. Grayson who'd appeared from nowhere. They had no idea they were about to meet the woman who'd been collecting their secrets. "You sure about this?" Wyatt asked, straightening his tie. His company's stock had already dropped 15 points since news of the investigation broke. "I've never been more sure of anything." Kenya's voice carried the calm of someone who'd stopped running from the truth. Marcus thinks he controls the narrative because he's got money and connections. But he forgot something important. I was married to him for 5 years. I know exactly how he thinks. The studio lights blazed like courtroom spotlights as she walked onto the set. Across from her sat Miranda Wells, Atlanta's most ruthless journalist, known for making politicians cry on live television. "Mrs. Grayson," Miranda began, "you've been accused of corporate espionage, manipulation, and fraud. How do you respond?" Kenya smiled. Not the shy expression of a maid, but the confident look of a woman who just played her winning hand. "I respond with facts, Miranda. 3 years ago, my ex-husband Marcus Peterson destroyed Grayson Industries' biggest competitor through illegal market manipulation. He used inside information, bribed officials, and when one of his partners threatened to expose him, Marcus made sure that man lost everything." The camera zoomed in as Kenya pulled out a tablet. "I have recordings, financial documents, and email chains proving everything. But here's what makes this interesting. I didn't steal these files. I legally obtained them during my divorce proceedings, and I've been waiting for the right moment to use them. Have you ever had to choose between safety and what's right? When telling the truth meant losing everything you'd built, would you still do it? Tell me in the comments, what would give you that kind of courage? So you married Wyatt Grayson for revenge?" Miranda pressed. "I married him because he chose me thinking I was powerless. But here's what he didn't know, and what Marcus didn't plan for." Kenya's eyes found Wyatt in the wings, his face tight with concern. Sometimes the person you're trying to use ends up changing you instead. Behind the cameras, Wyatt's phone exploded with notifications. The interview was trending nationwide. #KenyaTruth was climbing the charts faster than his PR team could track. "You're claiming your ex-husband orchestrated this entire situation?" Marcus needed Wyatt's company to fail so he could buy it cheap. He thought putting his ex-wife in Wyatt's path would create a scandal that would tank the stock price. What he didn't count on was me actually falling in love with the man I was supposed to destroy. The confession hung in the studio air like electricity before a storm. As the interview went live nationwide, Marcus watched from his hotel suite, phone already dialing. But the number he called wasn't his lawyer. It was someone much more dangerous. Someone who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The game had just escalated beyond corporate warfare. In 24 hours, she went from invisible Maid to the most talked about woman in America and the most hunted. Kenya's face appeared on every screen in Atlanta. Coffee shops played her interview on repeat. Social media exploded with opinions, half calling her a hero, half calling her a gold digger. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. "Look at this," Wyatt said, scrolling through his phone as they sat in his penthouse living room. "You've got 12 million views already. The hashtags told the story. #KenyaTruth, #Maid to Millionaire, #corporate revenge." News outlets were calling it everything from the ultimate revenge story to when domestic workers fight back. Kenya wasn't smiling. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the street 40 floors below. "Wyatt, we need to talk about security. I've already called the company. They're sending." "No." She turned from the window, her expression serious. Marcus doesn't lose quietly, and now that his plan failed, he's going to get desperate. Her phone buzzed constantly. Interview requests from CNN, Fox News, Good Morning America. Publishers offering book deals. Speaking agencies wanting to represent her. The invisible woman who'd cleaned houses for $3 above minimum wage was now worth millions in media value. But the messages that worried her weren't from journalists. They were from numbers she didn't recognize. Anonymous accounts sending photos of her leaving the penthouse. Details about her daily routine. Threats disguised as compliments. "He's having me watched," she said, showing Wyatt the latest message. It was a picture of her in the grocery store that morning, taken from across the parking lot. Wyatt's jaw tightened as he read the caption. Enjoying your 15 minutes, Kenya? Don't get too comfortable. If your private story suddenly became public, how would you handle the attention? When standing up for yourself means making enemies with power, what keeps you going? Share your experiences with being in the spotlight when you never asked for it. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. For years, Kenya had been invisible, the perfect position for gathering information. Now, visibility was making her a target. We could leave Atlanta, Wyatt suggested. Go somewhere Marcus can't reach us. That's exactly what he wants. Me gone, you discredited, and his hands clean. Kenya picked up the remote and turned to Channel 7's Evening News. Her interview was the lead story. The anchor's voice filled the room. Sources close to Peterson Industries suggest Mrs. Grayson's claims are part of an elaborate blackmail scheme. Meanwhile, federal investigators have declined to comment on the ongoing investigation. They're trying to control the story, Kenya said, making me look like a criminal instead of a witness. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered on speaker. Marcus's voice filled the room, smooth as poisoned honey. Hello, darling. Enjoying your moment in the spotlight. Wyatt stepped closer to Kenya, his presence a silent promise that she wasn't facing this alone. I'm enjoying watching your empire crumble, Kenya replied. Marcus laughed, the same cold sound that used to make her flinch during their marriage. Empire? Kenya, you always did think too small. This is just business. But making it personal? That was a mistake. The line went dead, leaving them staring at each other in the sudden quiet. The package arrived at dawn. No return address, no signature required. Inside, a single photograph. Kenya leaving the penthouse that morning, taken with a high-powered lens. On the back, 3 words that made Wyatt's blood freeze. She dies tonight. When they came for her, she discovered the difference between surviving and truly living, and chose to fight for both. The FBI safe house looked like every suburban home in Middle America. Beige walls, generic furniture, windows that couldn't open. But Kenya had lived in worse places, and unlike her childhood apartment, where fear lived in every corner, here she had choices. The marshals will stay outside, Agent Rodriguez explained, checking his weapon. We got surveillance on all approaches. You're safe here. Safe. The word felt foreign in Kenya's mouth. She'd spent 3 years planning this moment, but she'd never imagined it would end with her hiding behind bulletproof glass while Marcus's people hunted her. Wyatt paced the living room like a caged wolf. His company's stock was recovering. The public was rallying behind them after the death threats became public, but he'd trade every dollar to make Kenya safe. I should have seen this coming, he said for the 10th time. I should have known he wouldn't just roll over. You're not God, Wyatt. You can't predict everything. Kenya sat on the couch, looking calmer than anyone in her situation had a right to. Besides, this proves we were right. Innocent people don't send assassins. The news played constantly on the safe house television. Kenya's story had gone global. Women's rights groups were calling her a hero. Business ethics professors were using her case in their classes. A famous actress had optioned her life story for a movie, but fame wouldn't stop a bullet. The trial starts Monday, Agent Rodriguez said, ending a phone call. Federal prosecutor says they've got enough evidence to convict Peterson and his associates on conspiracy, fraud, and now attempted murder charges. Will she have to testify? Wyatt asked. That's up to Mrs. Grayson. Kenya looked up from the legal documents spread across the coffee table. I'll testify. This whole thing was about making powerful people face consequences for their actions. I'm not backing down now. When everything is at risk, what matters most to you? If you had to choose between safety and justice, which would you pick? Tell me about the most courageous decision you've ever made. That night, as Atlanta slept and security guards watched the safe house perimeter, Kenya and Wyatt lay together on the narrow bed, listening to the distant hum of traffic. If this is our last night, she whispered against his chest, I want to remember what it feels like to be alive. His hands found her face in the darkness, tracing the features he'd memorized over the past months. It's not our last night. We're going to have decades of nights. Promise me something, she said, her voice soft but steady. If something happens to me, don't let them make me a victim in the story. I made choices. I took risks. I fought back. Make sure they remember that. He kissed her then, pouring everything he couldn't say into the connection between them. Their lovemaking was desperate and tender, each touch a promise, each kiss a vow that tomorrow would find them together or not at all. Later, as Kenya slept in his arms, Wyatt stared at the ceiling and made his own promise. Marcus Peterson had spent 3 years trying to destroy them both. But he'd forgotten something important. Kenya Morrison Grayson wasn't the same broken woman who'd fled Atlanta in shame. She learned to fight back, and she taught Wyatt something he'd never known. Some things were worth risking everything for. Outside, the security detail changed shifts. Inside, 2 people who'd started as strangers in a cruel game held each other and waited for dawn. The courthouse steps stretched before them like a mountain to climb, reporters and protesters creating a gauntlet of noise and cameras. But as Kenya stepped from the armored car, she wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at the figure in the expensive suit standing at the top of the steps. Marcus had come to watch his empire burn, and his smile promised that if he was going down, he wasn't going alone. The courtroom became a battlefield where 3 years of pain and planning would be decided by 12 strangers who held the power to validate or destroy everything she'd sacrificed. Federal courtrooms weren't built for comfort. Hard wooden benches, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick, and an atmosphere that suggested justice was more about endurance than truth. But as Kenya took the witness stand, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: power. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a $1,000 suit, flanked by lawyers who cost more per hour than Kenya used to make in a month. His eyes never left her face, and his smile was the same one he'd worn during their marriage when he knew she couldn't fight back. "Mrs. Grayson," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you obtained the evidence against Mr. Peterson." Kenya's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. "During our divorce, I was entitled to financial discovery. What I found were records of illegal market manipulation, bribery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My ex-husband had been running these schemes for years." Marcus's lawyer shot up. "Objection. Hearsay and overruled. Continue, Mrs. Grayson." For 2 hours, Kenya methodically destroyed the man who'd once controlled every aspect of her life. She presented bank records showing illegal payments, phone recordings where Marcus bragged about destroying competitors, email chains proving the conspiracy to target Wyatt's company. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Grayson, that you married Mr. Grayson purely for revenge?" Kenya looked at Wyatt in the gallery, then back at the lawyer. "I married Wyatt because Marcus picked him as a target, yes. But what happened after that? The love, the partnership, the life we've built, that wasn't part of anyone's plan. That was real. Have you ever had to tell a difficult truth in public? When the system was stacked against you, what gave you strength? Share your stories of standing up when it mattered most." The defense tried everything. They painted Kenya as a gold digger. They suggested the evidence was fabricated. They claimed Marcus was the victim of an elaborate con game. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with a piece of paper that would determine whether 3 years of planning had been worth it. On the charge of conspiracy to commit securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of market manipulation, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. Marcus's face didn't change as the verdict was read, but Kenya saw his hands clench on the table. For the first time in their relationship, she had won and he had lost. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators received similar sentences. The companies involved faced millions in fines and civil penalties. As the marshals led Marcus away, he looked back at Kenya one final time. His expression held no apology, no regret, just the cold fury of a man who'd finally met someone better at the game than he was. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as Kenya and Wyatt walked to their car. But she only answered one. "Mrs. Grayson, what's next for you?" Kenya smiled, the real smile that had taken her 32 years to find. Justice was just the beginning. Now we build something better." As the jury foreman stood to read the verdict, Kenya felt Wyatt's hand find hers. Win or lose, they'd done something impossible. They turned a cruel joke into a love story, a business transaction into a partnership that changed them both. But the words that would define their future hung in the air, unspoken, while the whole world waited to learn whether justice was more than just a word carved in stone. 1 year later, the maid who was supposed to be disposable had built an empire of her own, and the CEO who thought he owned everything learned that the best things in life can't be bought, only earned. The community center in downtown Atlanta buzzed with energy as Kenya cut the ribbon on the Morrison Foundation for Worker Rights. The building had once housed a payday loan company that charged desperate people impossible interest rates. Now it offered legal aid, job training, and financial literacy classes to the same community that had once been prey. 2 years ago, Kenya said to the crowd gathered on the sidewalk, "I cleaned offices at night and took care of my sick mother during the day. I was invisible to the people whose garbage I emptied, whose coffee cups I washed." But invisible doesn't mean powerless. The audience, domestic workers, retail employees, restaurant staff, nodded and cheered. These are her people, the ones who've been forgotten by everyone except the people who needed them most. Wyatt stood in the back, watching his wife command the crowd with the same presence she'd once used to outsmart him. His company had recovered from a scandal stronger than before. Their new ethical business practices had attracted investors who cared about more than just profits. But his greatest achievement wasn't in the boardroom. It was standing on that makeshift stage, wearing a dress she'd bought herself with money she'd earned from speaking engagements and book deals. The Morrison Foundation isn't about charity, Kenya continued. It's about changing the systems that keep hardworking people trapped in poverty. It's about making sure nobody has to choose between their dignity and their survival. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal raised her hand. "Mrs. Grayson, do you ever regret the path that brought you here?" Kenya's eyes found Wyatt in the crowd, and her smile was soft with private memories. "Every choice I made led me to this moment. The pain, the planning, the risk, all of it brought me here. So no, I don't have regrets. I have gratitude." After the ceremony, after the interviews and photos and congratulations, Kenya and Wyatt finally made it home to the house they'd bought together. Not the penthouse where their story began, but a restored Victorian in an Atlanta neighborhood that was diverse, real, and theirs. That night, in their bedroom overlooking the city where it all began, they made love not as conqueror and conquered, not as revenge and redemption, but as two people who'd found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. "We did it," she whispered against his chest afterward, her wedding ring catching the light from the street lamp outside their window. "We turned their game into our victory." "No," Wyatt said, his arms tightening around her. "You did it. I just got smart enough to follow your lead." She laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "Marcus thought he was so clever, using me to destroy you. He never imagined that putting us together would make us both stronger." "What do you think he's doing right now?" Kenya considered this. Probably planning his appeal and telling himself this is all temporary. Men like Marcus never really change. They just find new ways to justify the same old games. Good thing we're done playing by their rules. So what would you do if someone underestimated you completely? If you had the chance to turn mockery into triumph, humiliation into strength? Comment below with what you would have done in Kenya's position. Would you have played the long game like she did? Or taken immediate action? 3 years ago, Kenya Morrison had been cleaning Wyatt Grayson's penthouse, invisible and ignored. Tonight, she was Kenya Grayson, founder of a $1 million foundation, best-selling author, and the woman who'd proven that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who's been underestimated. If this story of quiet strength and strategic brilliance touched your heart, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, about love that grows stronger under pressure, and about the power of patience in the face of injustice. Tell me in the comments which moment in Kenya's journey inspired you most. And remember, sometimes the most powerful revolution starts with one person deciding they've had enough. The quiet ones are watching, learning, and planning. Never forget that. Outside their window, Atlanta hummed with late-night energy, a city where dreams and schemes collided daily, where power changed hands in boardrooms and back alleys alike. But inside their bedroom, two people who'd learned the difference between surviving and thriving held each other and planned their next move. Not in revenge, not in anger, but in hope. The Maid's game was over. Now came the real victory, building something that would last.